divine tranquility or hellish punishment. This generic black and white theme of man's ultimate theological destiny has, for as long as we've been able to tell stories, occupied us in contemplation and philosophical wonder. Determined by the very imprint on our souls, inscribed with the choices, right or wrong, we've committed throughout our lives here on Earth, this polarized equation has either one of two outcomes. However, one can't help but wonder if there's somewhere in between good and evil exists something that doesn't adhere to the rules of heaven or hell. Something undefined, something neutral, or perhaps something even more chaotic. There once existed a being within the bayous of Louisiana, so violent, so erratic, so prone to volatile outbursts of unhinged rage, that the very essence of its being could be considered the embodiment of relentless fury and unforgiving anger. The Immolator, the enraged and unstoppable creature that contained within it an all-consuming fire, had cemented itself as an otherworldly terror and earned its well-substantiated fear among every faction of hunters that roamed the dead zone. Its inclination to raging anger in combination with its frail, hypersensitive skin, which when pierced would erupt and engulf anything in the vicinity in a violent and uncontrollable inferno of all-consuming flames. A powder keg of fire and fury. However, while the Immolator's presence certainly has been observed within the bayous of Louisiana, its precise origin, or rather its creator, is still debated to this day. For within the world of the Sculptor's corruption and its creations, this particular creature would stand out among the rest. Where most of the other creatures of the Sculptor followed loose, yet somewhat relatable characteristics of either small organisms, animals, or most commonly insects, the Immolator, in its shape of fire and flames, took form as a scorched and charred humanoid, a walking corpse of relentless fire. In the middle of this plethora of twisted biological limitations set upon our realm, one can't help but wonder where the characteristics of the Immolator fits in, as most of the entities derived from the Sculptor seems to be particularly vulnerable to fire, which make the Sculptor as the creator of the Immolator questionable. To understand its origin and shed light on its creation, we have to go back to the story of Reverend Jeremiah Byrne. Vague and most certainly unreliable, the story of the Reverend is a disorganized second-hand tale woven together by different accounts. One given to us through the memoirs of Father Vincent Clemens, and another through a dime novelist of questionable credibility. Father Vincent begins his tale describing a mundane late night where he, as he usually did, performed his godly services within the local chapter. This partly consisted of listening to the confession of churchgoers. However, this one night, a particular young boy would enter the confessional. The boy was erratic and riled up, almost stuttering out his words as he, a member of a group of low-life thieves and thugs that several preachers around New Orleans had condemned, confessed to lying and stealing. Though attentive and present, the boy's words already bored Father Vincent ever so horribly. The trials and tribulations of the men and boys who visited the church were all the same. Lying, stealing, adultery. He had heard it all before. The same old, same old. But then, as the boy mentioned a specific episode from the week prior, where a priest was viciously assaulted, beaten almost to death, hogtied and kidnapped from his own chapter, the boy suddenly had Father Vincent's undivided attention. He knew the priest of which the boy spoke, Reverend Jeremiah Byrne, who, according to the second source, the novelist, had taken part in publicly speaking out against the local gangs of thieves that roamed New Orleans. Father Vincent shook. An attack on a man of God was not to be taken lightly. The boy explained that he hadn't been there for the first part, the beating and kidnapping, but he had been there for the second part, which, by the boy's restraint and silence, suggested something far worse had happened. Though concerned about the outcome of the story, Father Vincent urged the boy to continue. The boy had the night prior to his confession been paid to take Reverend Jeremiah out to the bayou, which even Father Vincent knew was a shorthand euphemism for murder. Terrified, yet not remorseful, the young boy continued his confession as Father Vincent pressed for him to elaborate. Though ashamed of his morbid curiosity, Father Vincent hadn't experienced a confession quite as gripping as this in many years, and he was on the edge of his seat in excitement, hanging on every word of this potential murderer, as the boy described the beatings the priest had taken. Beaten to a pulp, but still the Reverend refused to stay quiet, condemning the thieves at every turn, and instead began reciting the Bible. Unfortunately, right before the climax of the boy's confession, an altar boy suddenly burst into the church, interrupting his story, screaming that he had read the newspapers said that Reverend Jeremiah had disappeared and several bodies had been found within the bayou. Before Father Vincent realized, the young boy from the group of thieves had vanished and failed to provide a proper ending to his gripping confession. Father Vincent was furious at the altar boy. The story had been so captivating, so intriguing. He needed to know how it ended. Fortunately for him, it didn't take long before an ending would suddenly present itself. Beaten within an inch of his life and thrown into the mud on all four by the group of thieves, the Fogs warned Jeremiah not to engage in any more sermons condemning their actions of robbing and stealing. Though on the brink of death, Jeremiah wouldn't budge. He would never be silenced, not with threats, not with violence. The stock of a rifle came crashing down on his skull, sending him face first into the dirt. The thieves, laughing at his suffering, approached him with rifles drawn, ready to put an end to his life. But from the partially unconscious body of Jeremiah came a mumbling that grew stronger and stronger. His voice turned to speech as he got up to his knees. His speech turned to preaching, growing ever so louder and louder as he recited the holy words of the Bible, proclaiming to speak with nothing but violence and destruction. His preaching turned to screaming, his voice roaring at the top of his lungs, as he, in the name of God, promised to destroy anyone who would dare to stand in his way, when suddenly his entire body erupted in a ball of fire, and he, with the fury of 1,000 men, charged at his enemies, engulfed in roaring flames. As the boy's confession was cut short before he could finish it, the end of this tale and Jeremiah's fate was provided to us by a novelist by the name of Jasper Priest, which might be a pseudonym for Father Vincent himself. Having admitted to be enticed by his own morbid curiosity of the boy's story, and having confessed to a deep love for dime adventures and the thrill they provided, Father Vincent might have capitalized on the murder of Jeremiah Byrne and written this dime novel piece, hoping to gain either fame, recognition, or fortune through the tragedy that had befallen the late Reverend. This means that the true fate of Jeremiah Byrne remains uncertain. Was it the very essence of helplessness and cruel injustice that, together with something from another realm, sparked this all-consuming rage? that engulfed and swallowed him? Was it perhaps the divine blessing, twisted by the effects of the Sculptor? Or maybe the sacrifice of his own beliefs, integrity and soul in a pact with the devil to destroy the godless heathens? Or was it perhaps an unstoppable and relentless divine fire sent to cleanse and purify the plains and swamps of Louisiana of the corruption itself? Or maybe something else entirely? Whatever the Immolator was and where it came from, its place and role within the bayous is still debated to this very day. Hey there, Hazmat here. That concludes the story of the Immolator. I hope you enjoyed it. As always, a big thanks goes out to the Hunters Lounge on Patreon, specifically Johnny Sevens, Jim and L. Bob, Corey Peterson, Derivative, Ryan, Goose, Doc Powell, Hambone, Gino Lucero, Slip, Stas Piestek, The Wizard of Cobber, Bubonic MCCC, Eli the Great, Gabe Benavides, Ghosty, Jane Doe, Jose Gonzalez, Kashiuka, Nightingale Far, Raven, Sir Bottoms, Spooks, The Loaf of Bread, Tim Wright, Tom Hengst, Ulf Yelström, and Wildcard. The Hunters Lounge does not only support me directly as a content creator, they also help me decide on future content, and you can join it for as little as $1 a month. The link is in the description below. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you in the next one.